Hello, and welcome to Day 2 of the online KT Conference. I'm your host for the day. My name is Ann Outlaw. As we're getting started, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box on the left side of the screen. For those of you who didn't get a chance to tune in on Monday, I'd like to go over some of the features of the Adobe Connect training platform. You should be listening over your computer speakers, and you can adjust the volume on your own computer. And there's also a speaker icon in the bar at the very top of your screen to adjust the volume. In the upper left of your screen is a chat pod where you can ask questions. This is the best way to communicate with the conference staff. And during the conference presentations, you'll see a pod labeled Presentation Materials. That is where you'll find a PDF copy of the slides and a text description for the current presentation. You may download these files by highlighting the file name and then selecting the download button below. At the bottom of the screen is a box with the conference logistics. It's readily available at all times. If you have any technical problems, you may contact our technical support at connectsupport@intisolve.com or by calling the number shown below. At the bottom right side of the screen is a pod with the helpful links, including cards, the conference website, the expo room, the agenda, and conference materials. Now let's get started. Monday was the first day of our online conference, and we had quite an afternoon. John Sheeta, the director of our funding agency, the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, or NIDLR, and Timjai Sudsawad, NIDLR's Knowledge Translation Program Coordinator, opened up the conference by giving us some NIDLR updates. Next, we heard from Tiffany Lowater from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. She gave an engaging presentation defining the value of public outreach for scientists. After Tiffany's presentation, Alberto Cairo came on and shared strategies for effectively using visualization to share your data with your audiences. And then we ended the day with a lively interactive discussion among our presenters and other NIDLR grantees. As you can see, today will be just as full. Today we'll hear from NIDLR grantees about how they've successfully used social media and other technology to progress their knowledge translation efforts. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers. We'll first hear from Michelle Meade and Eric Maslowski from the University of Michigan about the development and evaluation of SCI Hard, a mobile gaming app. Then we'll hear from Joy Hamill from the University of Illinois at Chicago and Lex Frieden from the Independent Living Research Utilization Program, or ILRU, at Tier Memorial Hermann Hospital about the interactive data displays developed by the National Network of ADA Centers Participatory Action Research Consortium. And later this afternoon, Mike Jones and John Morris from the Shepherd Center will share details from their app factory and the rapid development and deployment of assistive technology solutions. At the end of the day, we'll have another interactive discussion that will be led by Kathleen Murphy, the director of the Center on KTDRR. And for additional information about these sessions and presenters, please take a look at the conference webpage, and you can find that link in the Helpful Links pod. Before we start with our first presentation, I want to extend a big thank you to the Austin-based staff who have worked very hard to bring this conference to you. Tracy Bowman, Stephen Boydston, Kathleen Murphy, and Joanne Starks, as well as our IT support team. Thank you very much. So first up is Michelle Meade and Eric Maslowski from the University of Michigan, who will lead a conversation titled Gaming Spinal Cord Injury Rehabilitation, Translating Self-Management to Promote Health and Independence of Adolescents and Young Adults with Spinal Cord Dysfunction. So thank you both for being here. Michelle, are you ready to begin?
I am.
Great.
Okay. If we're all set, I'd like to thank you all for attending. We are very pleased to be able to present on our development and evaluation of SCI Hard. which is a mobile gaming app for individuals with spinal cord injury and dysfunction. As we start, my and Eric's disclosures, and we are not receiving any commercial support for this particular activity, and very much acknowledge the National Institute of Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research through our funding for the project, first as a field-initiated development grant, and now as part of the University of Michigan Technology, Increasing Knowledge, Technology, Optimizing Choice, Rehabilitation Engineering Research Center. We also wanted to thank our advisory council members who included both individuals with spinal cord injury as well as healthcare providers. I'll let Eric say a word about the development team as he led that effort.
Sure. Okay, so as with most technology projects, the development team is quite deep. You have the project director, which is Michelle Meade in this case. I led the design lead and project coordinator, but we had a fair number of full-time staff as well as student staff help with the development effort. And they typically fall into three categories: programming, art, and other. Other would be music or the integration of art and programming.
So, sorry, I'm still to figure out where I am in terms of the slides. That individuals, we created this project because individuals with spinal cord injury often have a difficult time with managing their health and independence. They have a complicated health management process. For those of you familiar with the conditions, individuals with spinal cord injury not only have to manage everyday health, including getting out, being active, exercising, eating nutritious food, but they also have to then manage those behaviors associated with the spinal cord injury and dysfunction. They have to do pressure relief. They have to manage and figure out the schedule for neurogenic bowel and bladder, and then they have to do this within the context of multiple environments, and often multiple people working to assist them depending on their level of injury. On top of that, you have issues with pulmonary functioning. You have issues with pain management. The list goes on. And so it's complicated. It's unending. And sometimes individuals just have to figure out which pieces are important right now. This is particularly problematic as they transition from childhood, in which often the parents are the managers of their health, to adulthood, in which they take over more and more of the process. Those who are unable to manage their health often do so or have problems because either they don't know what to do, they don't know how to do it, they don't have the skills to do it, they may not have the resources, particularly financial, they may not have the physical ability to do it, that they don't know how to communicate or work with others. They may not have this attitude that it's their responsibility, or they haven't accepted it. This often is associated then with the so individuals with newer injuries, those who are young, particularly within this 13 to 29-year-old age group, those with cognitive difficulties, those who are poor, those who don't have the transferable skills to assist with the project, or more likely to have issues. But this group is also very likely to have particular strengths that can be tapped into for types of projects such as these. These individuals are likely to be used to working with high definition types of projects. So, I'm sorry, let me just catch my breath for a sec and move forward.
I think this is a good moment to remind everyone who is participating in today's conference that you can use the chat pod to ask any questions to our presenters, or you're welcome to use the hashtag KTDRR16 in Twitter to follow along and pose your questions on Twitter. So thank you.
Okay, thanks for just a moment. The methods to help individuals with health management include education, of course the hands-on rehabilitation that we all do, the time that people actually have the physical therapist, the staff around to assist them. But as we all know, those are getting smaller and smaller and less time. They have outpatient settings, but often those are more constrained. There may be transitional programs or apartments, vocational rehabilitation settings, and occasionally you get boosters. There are peer mentors, and adaptive sports and recreation can be really wonderful with helping to learn health management strategies. What we would also like to propose, though, is that games can be an important source of an approach for managing health and behavior change, particularly for this group of adolescents and young adults. As we know, individuals with individuals from across the United States have varying degrees of use of both computers and handheld mobile technology. What we find is that individuals from this age group, the young adults, are most likely to access and use handheld devices. We also find with data from the Pew Report that individuals from racial and ethnic minority backgrounds are equally as likely to have access. This isn't always true with other types of devices, be those games like gaming consoles or even computers. As with individuals with spinal cord injury, it's similar, that we have high percentages of the 13 to 29-year-old age group owning and being able to access. The data here is from several years ago, and I think particularly both smartphones and tablets have become much more ubiquitous for this group and population.
Michelle, before we move forward, it looks like we have a question in the chat box, and it asks, does the data in the table, is that individuals with SCI only, or does that include other groups, the general population?
Okay, this slide now is the use and ownership of individuals with spinal cord injury, where the one before that is the use and availability. This is from the American Life Project, and gives data for adults or individuals in the U.S. for the varying years from 2010, 2013, and 2015 for the various categories. And so the the second slide here is from a survey data that we did here at the University of Michigan probably 3 years ago at this point.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification, Michelle.
Sure. 10. So we wanted to talk a little bit about serious games. And in fact, I will let you.
Sure. So serious games have kind of taken multiple forms over the years, going back to very simple edutainment type of products, all the way up to the more modern approach, which is a more subtle approach for introducing serious concepts or meaningful play into a gaming experience. And so you typically find these in a couple categories, such as games for health, for preventative purposes, educational assessment, therapeutic, advertising-based games, such as advergames, games specifically for training, for science and research, education, as well as production as well.
Within rehabilitation, games have very much been accepted and incorporated. Often they serve as motivation within therapy sessions. The phrase rehab kind of takes on this idea of let's bring in these games to give people a reason to use their arms, to stand up more, to engage with other groups, or to practice certain types of motions. They've also, though, been included with assessment processes, with skill development and training, with conducting simulations, particularly as associated sometimes with PTSD, with psychological situations, or with the use of virtual worlds. There is evidence that these games have or can promote health management skills. Various research studies have found them effective in increasing knowledge and motivation, developing and practicing skills, changing attitudes, increasing self-efficacy, improving adherence, reducing symptoms, and so on. One game in particular deserves attention and notice because there have been randomized clinical trials about it, and that is the game Remission, which is a shooter game developed by Hope Labs for children and teenagers with cancer. The idea with this game is to have your character Roxy shoot down the nanos and the cancer cells. They found that playing it increases not only knowledge about the medicines and the importance of taking it, but also increased adherence and self-efficacy for it. When we thought about designing the game, we tried to take an evidence-based and theoretically informed approach to it. We looked at and incorporated models of health management and behavioral change, not only looking at and reviewing current self-management programs, but also looking at cognitive behavioral therapy, health belief models, self-regulation, and so on. We really wanted to optimize the chances that this particular intervention would be able to hit all the buttons with regard to learning and behavior change. The other piece that was important for us was thinking about not only the models of how people develop or change behavior, but also the use of technological internet gaming interventions with this process. And so this theory, the theory by RITTERBAND and colleagues, helped to inform how it's the use of the intervention, whether it was a website or a game or other material, then allowed for the mechanisms of change and then promoted behavior change, system improvement, and treatment. But within that, it recognized that you couldn't just assume that if you give people the website or game that they will play, and that without that playing, you can't expect any of the other processes to occur. And so it's important to consider aspects of the environment of who is being designed for, the support people would receive in doing that, as well as the characteristics of that game, website, or other e-learning or electronic intervention in itself. When you think about the characteristics of the user, you think about what, I think especially in working in rehabilitation, you think about the functional abilities. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But for us, it was thinking about folks with spinal cord injury and thinking about not only the individual with paraplegia who may be able to play just using their hands, such as any other gamer, but also the individuals with the high-level tetraplegia who we also wanted to make sure to engage and involve with the process. So we thought about the physiological factors and functional abilities. We also then thought about characteristics of the demographics, age, gender, race, their education and health literacy. We thought about some of the cognitive factors, their beliefs, attitudes, and skills. Once again, for us, it was a matter of figuring out a way to try and engage and make an intervention that was relevant to what we saw as a relatively high-risk group, adolescents and young adults with spinal cord injury. We thought that this group would not, well, I know as a rehabilitation psychologist that they often don't want to talk with me, and they may run the other way, but they're very happy to play their games, to interact with their cell phones, and to use that as a learning device. So we wanted to consider for spinal cord injury that you had a primarily young male population, maybe with different individuals with different backgrounds and different types of injury being at more high risk, and have an intervention which would particularly appeal to them.
Michelle, we have one more question that's come up and a comment. Marta asks, I would have loved to have had this data when I worked as a recreational therapist in a skilled nursing pediatric unit. We used the Wii with our kids and teenagers as an intervention. However, we constantly had to justify buying new games for the Wii. My question is, how is the data you are presenting today and the work that you're doing being translated and made available for recreational therapists?
That's a good point. I know we'll have this available. We just got a paper on the use of the various consoles and electronic devices that was accepted in the Journal of Spinal Cord. And we are having we submitted many aspects of this presentation for publication as well. And so we will make sure that we include those links as they come up, and we're always happy to consult about the issue. I think a lot of it is, how do we be relevant? How do we not only create great things, but create useful interventions that people want to engage in and will bother with? And I think that's why this fits in with the knowledge translation category. As we talk later, it's really about translating a program that was created about self-management into a format that would be relevant to our target group. So a little bit back to the slides, thinking about the characteristics of the environment, thinking about the professionals, the policies, the healthcare system, and how those play in. Thinking also about for the characteristics of the intervention, whether that's a website or a game, could we create something that wouldn't, look dated in 3 years, that did have the message, had a method of delivery that was engaging and did meet expectations? Could we, address the norms and the familiarity and really leverage the skills of our target population? And those all came into the process that we're going to discuss. And then finally, when it came to thinking about components of a serious game, there are certain aspects in terms of not only identifying the target behavior that we wanted to be aware of, but also having a story behind it. And so you'll find out as we talk about the development a little bit more and break down what we did, that SCI Hard is not an Angry Birds, you can just play this for 10-minute type of thing. It's a really involved, a little bit warped story and process in which there is a story arc in which you have protagonists and antagonists, in which there the time and the evaluation, they're all included. And this was part of the decision-making process as we went along. We really relied on our advisory council to provide us with feedback about what things would be relevant and acceptable for them. And so we wanted to now, I think, go on and dive into what we did develop and why. If you can hit the video, this is the opening screen. So what you saw there was our recruitment video that we have to provide that little overview and give you a glimpse of the graphics and the music and the styles involved in the game. Now we really want to focus on what we were doing and why we made some of the decision choices we did. As we kind of mentioned, our project was focusing on developing an electronic game to allow for the development or review self-management skills. And by self-management skills, I mean skills such as problem solving, communication, organization, stress management, self-monitoring, and attitude. And I guess the whole idea is that the idea with regard to attitude was that individuals with spinal cord injury and spinal cord dysfunction can and should manage their health. They have to take responsibility for initiating certain types of behaviors, and only when you do that can you get on with life. In this case, they need to learn how to manage. The character wakes up in the hospital and has to learn how to manage their condition so that they can save the world. We also worked about focusing on the possibility of participating in the community, reducing secondary conditions, and people really wanting to play this and not just playing because they had to. The target group, once again, it was originally created for adolescents and young adults 16 to 24-year-olds with traumatic spinal cord injury, and then we have expanded the use and the involvement to test its effectiveness with individuals with all types of spinal dysfunction, including spina bifida. When we think about it, the characteristics of the millennial generations, these were really key in designing this game, and in particular, in even considering the use of a game. These are individuals who are very comfortable with technology, and even individuals with spina bifida who may show decreased motivation and expertise with other types of educational and activities as they get older. They remain very comfortable with technology. And so we wanted to incorporate the learning styles and expectations involved for the group. We didn't want to just have videos that they could tune out or educational handouts or books that they would not read. Those are there. They are an important part of how we do rehabilitation, but they're not always optimal for this group. There were also a lot of expectations with regard to video games. Eric?
Sure. So expectations around video games is kind of a moving target. New advances are constantly coming out. There's new platforms, new considerations, new kind of trends that affect a rapidly evolving industry. And a lot of times the audience follows those trends or dictate those trends. But there are a couple things that were fairly consistent, especially for this demographic. They wanted detailed graphics. They wanted high-impact images. They wanted rich, deep experiences, so multiple levels of interactivity, lots of control, or the sense of control over their character, over their environment, fast pace whenever possible, and also basically social interaction where possible. So removing the sense of space and allowing them to be immersed in the player experience.
I think the other aspect of this to consider with regard to expectations is that the video game industry spends billions of dollars each year. And so it was trying to develop an experience which wasn't that resource heavy, but also was not playing pong either. And so something that could maintain their involvement and engagement of this group. With regard to the associations with spinal cord injury, it was really trying to figure out the impairment level and what that would mean. I made when engaging Eric as a developer and his group, it was like, okay, Eric, this is the characteristics of the individuals, and if we can have it played by someone with high-level tetraplegia who may not have hand functioning but have arm functioning, that would be great. And then I hit him with an advisory council member who was a vent user and needed to play with a mouse stick, and they needed to respond. But I know this very much went into the design decisions.
Right. So some of those design decisions actually made it possible to scale it to people with different levels of function. We learned a couple key principles through our engagement with the advisory council and kind of the iterative approach that we took to development, where we would build something, let them play, figure out if we failed. But if we failed quickly, and we could respond and adjust and keep on evolving the product as we learned more about the users, about the process, and so forth. And so a couple of those key principles were things like, single action mechanics. Many video games have you doing many things at the same time. And that's very difficult to manage, not only on a touch device, but also for this particular demographic. So instead of running and shooting, you pick one. Is it more about evading, or is it more about targeting? And then you focus on that single primary movement. I see that there's a question about development. And so the development was pretty much about 3 years, and that went through multiple cycles. So it was something that was constantly worked on, but in different capacities. So for example, initially we focused on proof of concept, just getting some core technologies into the hands of the users. But also, we were trying to test where the line was and trying to figure out what this demographic was comfortable with. And so it was a very kind of dynamic, always changing sort of development process. Our plan constantly changed.
I think the other aspect that changed was the limitations of the devices. I'm not sure if this is here in the future, but it's worth mentioning that, we had a very graphic-rich environment. The art that involved, which is all original, and then figuring out how much we could put in the screen, the memory, the capacity of the programs of the devices, and how that fit together. And so that was also of a consideration as we move forward. We tried to make decisions when involving the game itself about really trying to enhance engagement. And so individuals can customize their characters. They can change their skin tone, they can change their shirt color, and as they go on, they can collect various equipment or clothing or such that they can play around with in the process. Eric was more the expert in terms of, okay, how do you take advantage of the OCD characteristics or the competitive nature of this group to do a little bit better. But also, I guess, an aspect I didn't mention in the other screen was being told, this group doesn't actually want to read the directions. They're going to just go in, dive in, and make mistakes, and then go back and read if they have to. Having dialogue on the screen was a limitation, and so we were able, through the various grants, to upgrade it from having dialogue that had people read it to having voiceovers, which not only added to some of the humor of the process, but sort of forced a certain pace with the game and going through it.
And also the use of students on the whole creation of this project really helped kind of keep things in budget as well. With such kind of like a community here, we were able to find very talented programmers, artists, sound engineers, and so forth to leverage their skills, but also their expertise because they were coming from a similar, age group. And so it just really helped shape the project and make sure that we got it in on budget.
And I think that's just one of the aspects of it. It wasn't, I came in with a certain idea, and then it was really a development team that allowed for their creation. And as Eric mentioned, this really iterative process that went on. The inspirations, I think, were very much there as well, that we were trying to not match what was out there, but be informed at least by what the group might expect. And so the games listed there are those that were in the back of our mind as we were going. I think particularly the decision was made early on to go with a comic book style of art rather than to use a 3D type of or virtual reality.
Right, or like a hyper realistic sort of visual. So we tried to steer away from that to try to keep it within scope, but also to keep it relevant for the group. Hyper-realistic sort of scenes, such as like the Call of Duty series and so forth, is a much larger endeavor and was beyond the scope of this project. But the interesting thing about this demographic is if you reach all of those other kind of checkpoints that we talked about earlier in terms of interactivity, social, detailed graphics, and so forth, it can still be cartoony but detailed. It can still be stylized and detailed, and that was an important thing that we took in mind. So we just really tried to capture the essence of all of this popular media and translate it into this particular product.
There was just a question about why only males. When we, as mentioned, when we first created the game, the first iteration of the project, we were looking at spinal cord injury, and traumatic spinal cord injury, as we know, is about 80% males, and especially young adult males being at high risk, and having then an intervention which would be relevant to that group. As we expanded the target population, we did allow for female avatars, and we did change a little bit of the storyline and the approach to be more inclusive with that process. And I guess the other aspect of the inspiration was not only the visualization, but really a little bit warped perspective on this. So it's a very much tongue-in-cheek process that you'll see with regard to the characters, how seriously they take themselves, and how it all ends up together. And I think as a psychologist, that was particularly true because you may have noticed, well, we'll get to that in a little bit. But so the inspiration, the game itself is an action-adventure kind of. There really isn't a lot similar to it out there because it takes a big combination of not only the adventures, the shooters, but also puzzle, strategy, sports, and kind of mingles it all up into something that we, really hope it is engaging to the group. That the interactivity, the character interacts with the environment, with other characters. They are forced to apply skills, to make choices, to monitor health statistics, to perform behavior. This was kind of, I guess, similar in some ways, as Eric explained to me, about how in shooter games they have to monitor how many bullets they have left and think about recharging their guns or such in order to go forward. And so rather than monitoring bullets, they're monitoring how long it's been since a pressure relief, and then thinking about performing one or having the character perform one in order to continue to move forward and not get dropped in their health statistics. And so we used some of the gameplay characteristics and rules that they were familiar with to really reinforce the sense of there are rules with you managing your health too, and you gotta figure it out in order to be successful and get on with the rest of the game or life as you would have it. So the target behaviors that we were working on were associated with improving health and participation, being aware of the factors that are related to your health, having an attitude of personal responsibility, knowing the importance of communicating with others, particularly healthcare providers, and then 3 specific behaviors, those with skin management, and so performing pressure reliefs, bowel and bladder management, monitoring when you needed to go to a cath or to have a bowel program, and then nutrition, diet, and exercise. We thought about change methods, in terms of increasing knowledge, developing and reinforcing self-management skills, seeing the character doing it, having opportunity to try and fail, and kind of also seeing what the possibilities and consequences are of not performing the behaviors. But being reinforced, seeing the timer, seeing the relationship between your scores and what you do. And so once again, it was an iterative process that it was adapting an existing self-management program that I had worked with a team to develop, the health mechanics program with specific skills and a specific focus about spinal cord injury, and then translating it into the format. And so the character wakes up in a rehab setting and trying to figure out, okay, what went on? And they have to figure out how to first figure out how to manage their health given a spinal cord injury. And so you have here the player character, the hero, and Dr. Ali, who's a physiatrist in the piece, and then save the world. The rehab team is on here. You have Dr. Ali. OT and PT are up in this upper right section. So the physical therapist and occupational therapist who are there, and their associated personalities. You have Raz, who's the rehab engineer, who also has a spinal cord injury, and you find out why during the game. And then you have Dr. Shrink, who is trying to take over the world. He's the rehabilitation, or well, he's a psychologist who invented the Chillax 3000 game and process. In the game, folks, and Eric, jump in anytime,
Sure.
have to choose an assistant, and so they have to think about, this isn't for all time, but as they begin the week, they don't have much strength. They have to learn, and so an assistant is there only during certain hours to provide some help with the process. Of course, they have to wind up saving the assistant at some point, but that's part of what's going on. And so this adds to the customizability as they choose who they want to interact with and find out their backstory. That they relearn mobility by engaging in, I'm not sure, mini games, but processes, thinking about this allows them not only to learn about manipulating the wheelchair, so the gameplay mechanics, but also thinking about practice and the need to think about, okay, closed environments versus large environments. It's also a way to give in humor as you see this upper right corner that is the converted laundry room that now is a PT track, and the individual has to learn how to stop themselves before they go into the pile of pain, or the laundry pile of pain. They learn what they need to, what self-care means and what they have to monitor. Once again, we started with the skin and pressure release, bowel and bladder, and then with the RERC, they were able to add diet and exercise. This is all then goes on the, what's the name of it? It was the Personal Operating System, or POS, or alternative use of that acronym. But it's, once again, this type of approach where individuals are used to tracking health and stamina and other gaming statistics and bringing that rules and approach into this health learning process. Anything else about the monitoring? And that they have to do some cognitive testing prior to discharge, and so really forced to interact with the evil Dr. Shrink. Brings in another type of puzzle or game and problem solving, and also some fun. Once they're able to leave rehab, they have to think about, so what are they doing at home? And in particular, the bottom one at the right is the importance of, or allowing them to rearrange their environment. And I think this, for me, as thinking about self-management, is really allowing for the implementation of organization, and the importance of developing an environment that's going to work for you and that allows you to do as much as possible. They have to get ready for the day with a backpack and figuring out what they can carry and what they can't. Bringing cat kits, I think we realized this from patient interaction in which, they might show up at a rehab appointment and not be able to cast, which is really problematic. And so the players can leave the house without a cast kit, but then they're not going to be able to do their regular needed functions and behaviors during the day, and their health is going to tank. So it's, once again, incorporating these important requirements and processes within it. Choices about diet and nutrition, and I'll let Eric say about this, because I think it's both the diet choices and then the consequences.
Sure. So we, excuse me. So we have multiple food options within the game, each with kind of a correlation to basic principles of stamina, health, and fitness. And so, for example, if the player is getting fatigued and their stamina is dropping, they can choose to have something like a candy bar, which is a quick jolt, but could have adverse effects to their fitness level. On the other side, they could choose to have something a little bit healthier. And as they make these choices, their physique actually changes. So they can go from thinner to overweight, or even severely underweight, and all of those have repercussions in terms of how well they perform in the environment. So if the player wants a little extra edge when combating a boss, they can get in shape, and they're going to actually see results in doing so.
So I know we're going to speed this up as we get through it. It's, once again, applying the health management skills in the environment. You don't do the needed behaviors. You get dinged with regard to your health and what you're able to do. And that is not only with the monitor and the screen with the stats, but then there are also very visual consequences, such as the stink cloud that goes behind you if you don't empty your bowel on time. That people have to engage in the environment. This is the Girl Scout you have to engage in order to cross the bridge to save your assistant who was kidnapped by the evil squirrels. That is the idea of assisting and minigames to gather money that you need to use to buy a van later on, managing other people, figuring out what emotions, what they want, so that you can gather points, thinking about independence and what it takes to become independent. In this case, getting your driver's license back so you can get the van, and get a van that's nice, like the Black Mamba, rather than the Craptastic. That is dealing with other people. In this case, it was getting into a club to meet your friends and going crowd surfing in the process. And finally, being recruited into the underground resistance so that you can defeat the evil Dr. Shrink and save the world. That when we were looking at the game, we first looked about the usability and enjoyment, and we got pretty good results. It's not for everyone, that improved with the use of the voiceovers, with the pace, and as we got rid of the bugs as this process, where have some evaluation data also related to the short-term stuff, and now, in fact, what we're doing is an RCT. So with the evaluation, we enrolled 18 individuals from the 16 to 29-year-old. We had 14 complete that aspect of the studies. One of the things we looked for, were there any changes in emotional distress? So this game was not designed to improve depression or anxiety, but we also wanted to make sure that it also did not make people more anxious or more frustrated or discouraged. And we were fortunately find that there weren't negative consequences that seemed to be associated with playing. There were no specific at least with the small group, with regard to changes in adjustment issues or acceptance of disability. But there seems to be a trend, particularly with regard to the health behaviors and the self-reporting more use and more acceptance of doing positive health behaviors, particularly with regard to the skin and the genital urinary types of behaviors. When asked about the game and what people thought, once again, some of them liked it, some of them liked it just a little bit, some of them thought it was really cool and that it helped them to sort of see things and restructure things differently. They also not only said it could be helpful for them, particularly adolescents newer on after a spinal cord injury, but that it could be used to promote understanding among friends and others who needed a better sense of really what's involved and how complicated managing a spinal cord injury could be, or a spinal cord dysfunction could be, with getting on with your life. We are now in the midst, in fact, we've extended the randomized clinical trial that is part of our RERC to allow for additional gameplay. We, in fact, we're hoping individuals on this call may know of possible participants to be involved. The SCI Hard is now available on both Apple and Android platforms for download, though it's only playable with the particular code. And individuals who do play are asked to do a baseline, then they're randomized either to SCI Hard or a control game, which was a little bit hard to find something comparable, playable for folks with high-level tetraplegia and available on both Apple and Android platforms. But we were able to do that in Detective Grimoire after they playing and after we get data from them that allows us to make sure both that they played the game and kind of determine what pieces they played, where they may have had problems. We do a follow-up assessment 1 month later and 3 months later. That individuals can earn up to $100 by playing. And once again, go to scihard.com if you know of anyone who may be interested. With that one, we're looking at cognitive behavioral factors, so psychosocial outcomes, and related to attitude towards disability, problem solving, and self-management, as well as then the relationship between any changes and actual playing behavior. We currently have 144 people screened, 92 enrolled, but we're trying to get up to 200 enrolled. The issue, though, that comes up, and I know we need to turn off, though, is this ongoing support and sustainability. I'm not sure how much it's been talked about by other presenters, but with mobile games, what we found is every time Apple has a new release, we need our programmer to go back in and make changes. While that is okay, as long as we have grant support, we want to get this out, but being able to have a model that allows us to sustain it over multiple operating systems and iterations is going to be the ongoing issue. And so the technology transfer isn't one of simply having a developer buy it, because especially with a relatively small audience, that $2 downloads isn't going to cut it, but whether it's figuring out the economic model of preventing secondary conditions, and one pressure ulcer is what, $60,000, $80,000, $300,000 or so, and so easily support a programmer on that, or having other approaches, open source or such. So take-home points, healthcare is changing. There are a lot of different methods out there. I guess what we see is that games can be one complement to the existing strategies. We don't want to replace them, but we think it's a way of targeting and using the strengths and types of preferences of a specific group to make something that's relevant and engaging to them that reinforces learning principles or uses learning principles to reinforce knowledge and behaviors of what's important. With regard to the development, I guess I'll leave it up to Eric if you have any final take-home points.
Stay flexible and yeah, just listen to your users. Those are the two main takeaways.
Okay. The references, or at least select ones, are available. And if you have any questions, we'll not only be here at the end of the day, but you can always email us, and please check out more information online at, you type in scihard.com, you'll get to the study website.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and to Eric. A really fascinating presentation and an innovative way that you've used your NIDLR grants. We did have one quick question before we move on, and Barb asks, when do you introduce this game to clients? In the hospital, during rehab, discharge, or later? And there must be a lot of individual factors that come into this decision.
It is. Right now, it's still primarily used for research, and so we're trying to get the evidence to say, okay, this is not only it's not going to cause problems, but it is important before we put a lot of effort into that uptake. We have, though, had recent requests for permission to use the game clinically, and that is both in an inpatient setting, and I do think in an inpatient setting at least, I would recommend the use or the concurrent or parallel gameplay with a rehab therapist so that they can talk about what's going on, process the relationship to the requirements in the game and what the character does with what's going on in therapy. And also to process the different perceptions of the character. In particular, the rehab psychologist can either be taken very tongue-in-cheek or may, say, okay, do I really want to see that psychologist? Is he trying to shrink my head or get into my mind? And so I think playing along with them in the context either inpatient or outpatient as a clinical application is recommended.
Definitely. Well, thank you both very much. I know we have more questions, but I believe we'll go ahead and save those for the interactive discussion this afternoon, just so we can stay on schedule. So, thank you again, Michelle and Eric. And now we'll be moving towards the second presentation of the day, and we'll hear from Joy Hamill and Lex Frieden, and they will talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act Participatory Action Research Consortium, or the ADA PARC, and their interactive data displays of community and work disparities.